Trier has had the largest number of professed and devoted followers so far in literary history. The Holy Bible has to be dismissed from the competition. Although referred to by devout men as the Word of God, it is in publishing terms an anthology. That leaves only two contenders, Karl Marx and Muhammad. By any accounting, the followers of Marx now greatly outnumber the sons of the prophet. He was buried here in Highgate Cemetery, London, on March 17, 1883. It is a place of only minor pilgrimage. Until about 20 years ago, Marx's grave was almost unmarked. A near companion is Herbert Spencer, and it's hard to imagine two men who are taking less pleasure in the company of each other. Karl Marx, we should know, was not one but many men. A truly prodigious congregation. The world celebrates him as a revolutionary, the parent of revolution. He was also a very great social scientist. Many would say with justice, the most original and imaginative economist and the most erudite political philosopher of his age. He was also a brilliant journalist. All American Republicans should note with pride that during an exceptionally meager time in his life, Marx was sustained by the New York Tribune, and he was thought its best correspondent. Marx was also an historian with a living sense of history. This was most important. Perhaps it is a sense of history that divides good economics from bad economics. Anyway, I've often thought so. Marx led, and perhaps it would be more accurate to say he made, the revolt against the world that we've been examining in the last two programs. He would have expected us to look at that revolt and the man who made it in their historical context. This is the pleasant house where Marx was born. It is a museum, a modest tourist attraction, a small source of profit for the now rather conservative Rhineland town of Trier. Trier, or Trev, is at the head of the Mosel Valley. In 1818, it was a lovely part of Europe, and it still is. There was much here for anyone with a feeling for history. Once, as Augusta Trevorum, it was called the Rome of the North. It was the principal bastion against the German tribes that frequently, until 1945, erupted southward on the Latins. The Porta Nigra, the Black Gate, is the most impressive Roman relic in northern Gaul. Trier is now part of Germany. In 1818, it was only recently so. When the Marx family moved to this house, French occupation had just given way to Prussian rule. The casino club here was founded during the French occupation as a literary center, and Heinrich Marx, Karl's father, was a member. The building now houses the French Army offices in Trier. No one now much notices the French, but before Marx's birth, the French presence was very important, and so was the transfer back to Prussia. The change was a matter of prime importance for Marx's parents. The French had been comparatively liberal with the ancient Jewish community of the town. Prussia was not. The Marx family, whose ancestors are buried here, was Jewish. Many of the ancestors had been rabbis. As an officer of the High Court and the leading lawyer of the town, Heinrich Marx could not be a Jew. So he and his family were baptized. It was probably a purely practical step. By the time Karl Marx was born, the family had ceased to regard religious forms as deeply important. There was another legacy of France to Trier, and that was a general openness to ideas. These included the utopian and idealistic socialism of Saint-Simon and Fourier, and a condemnation of the great and growing differences between rich and poor. At his school here, the young Marx was captured by this mood. It survives in early schoolboy essays, one on the choice of a career.
The choice of a career should be where one can best work for humanity. Our ashes will then be watered with the gleaming tears of noble men.
Marx's involvement with religion traces to these years. Both his Jewish antecedents and his conversion to Christianity were in later years to be exceedingly useful to Marx's enemies. Anti-communism could be combined with anti-Semitism. Also, there would be a lurking suspicion that Marx was anti-Semitic. After all, he had been baptized. Some of his writing was very hard on Jews, although he seems to have used the term as a synonym or a metaphor for an avaricious businessman. This was common literary practice at the time, as it had been for centuries. And with all else, Marx was an atheist in a century that took religion very seriously. Not a passive, but an active atheist. In one of his memorable passages, he described religion as the opium of the people. It taught them to acquiesce patiently in hardship and in exploitation when they should rise up in angry revolt. To be Jewish, possibly anti-Semitic, of parents baptized as Protestants in a Catholic land, and to be militantly hostile to religion, protected Marx and his followers forever from any threat of religious applause. Marx and religion would be forever antipathetic. To his idealism, the young Marx soon added a strong streak of romanticism. It's a tendency that has been richly nurtured over time by the Rhine and the Mosel. While still in his middle teens, he affirmed his love for Jenny von Westphalen. Jenny was the daughter of the town's leading citizen, Baron Ludwig von Westphalen. Westphalen was an intellectual and a liberal, and he'd taken a great liking to the young Marx. Walking on the banks of the Mosel, he introduced his young friend to romantic poetry, and also to the notion that the ideal state would be socialist, not capitalist. Be based on common property, not private property. This was obviously a thought of some importance for the young Marx. At 17, Marx was sent down the Mosel and the Rhine to Bonn, to the university. This was then a small academy of a few hundred students, rather aristocratic in tone, and also romantic in mood. That was still Marx's mood. He now extended it on from poetry to the related fields of dueling and drinking. Even by the rather relaxed standards of the time, he seems to have been a very idle student. He stayed at Bonn only a year, and then moved on to Berlin. This was much more than a change in universities. It was a change into the very center of German, even European, even Western intellectual life. In Berlin, Marx fell under the spell of the philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and one group of his university followers, the young Hegelians. Hegel had been